This is the Power Movement.
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and I'm going to ring in the new year with a dude I've known since he was 16 or 17 years old. And back then, he was an up-and-comer on a K2 team that was stacked. Chris Benchetler is arguably the hardest working man in pro skiing. Not only is he an athlete, but he's an artist, agent, producer, director, marketer, pretty much everything but distributor, and I'm sure I'll get into that at some point. While Chris has been putting together memorable segments over the past 20 years, he's going to be remembered for his most recent project, the biggest collaboration of his life, working with the Grateful Dead to produce his visual masterpiece, Fire on the Mountain. So the way this podcast works is I catch up with Chris for 10 minutes in the beginning, then I drop a re-edited 20-minute conversation that we recorded back in 2016 that gives you more of Chris's backstory, and then we dive into the past couple of years and working with the Grateful Dead. Before we get into the podcast, I want to wish you all a happy new year. I also want to ask you to do a few things for me. The first is subscribe to the podcast and tell a friend or a stranger to do the same. Next, I want you to follow me on Instagram at The Powell Movement. And finally, I want you to support my great sponsors who make the show happen. They are Evo, Stanley, Skye Optic, the Summit at Snoqualmie, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Now, let's talk to Chris Benchetler. Did you get out and shoot today?
I did. It was fantastic.
How's the Mammoth skiing? You guys have a lot of snow?
We do. I haven't been skiing that often. I've been quite busy, but Thanksgiving it kind of dumped and it's been slowly trickling in ever since. So it's been pretty sweet.
You've been on a whirlwind tour. You get back, and I would think you'd chill a little bit, but right out to shoot right away.
Yes, I'd say it was a pretty casual shoot because Pondella just got a new camera and I don't have any of my new ski graphics or anything, so the photos will not go anywhere. It was skiing with Pondella, shooting some pics. It was still enjoyable. Not too work-esque.
And you're solo dadding it right now?
I am.
So what do you do with the baby when you're out skiing?
We have help. We have a nanny that Kimmy and I brought on board.
Fancy.
I know. We both don't have a lot of family or help. She's lost both her parents to cancer, and I lost my dad. So
yeah,
we're kind of stranded on the little island. And when they say it takes a village, it certainly does. So we hired this wonderful young lady named Elle, and she is more or less on call. She was a per diem EMT, and we try to not abuse using her too often, but she's pretty rad and she lives in town, so makes it nice and convenient.
Yeah, it's nice to secure people that you trust. And another icebreaker I have for you is we have a mutual friend. I'm going to call him Jeff. And Jeff went to ski with you last year. And when he got back to Seattle, he'd mentioned to me, he's like, yeah, I asked Chris if he listened to the podcast, and I was like, yeah, what'd he say? And he said that you don't anymore, and that he said I should call you for feedback. And before I ask you for feedback, I should mention why your feedback is so valuable. You're one of those rare people that I've worked with who are super talented at everything you do, and you have the work ethic to match all that talent. I look at your art, that's amazing. Every piece I see, I'm blown away. Your skiing's spoken for itself for as long as anybody can remember, and I'm sure there's a ton of other shit that you're good at. The problem about asking someone like yourself if you're good at things is that you're really humble, and you most likely don't like to talk about being good at things. You just are good at things. So I'm going to phrase this set of questions looking at your life. If your ability as a skier is a 10, let's look at some of the other things that you do in life and where you rate. How are you as a surfer?
So if I'm a 10 as a skier, I'd maybe give myself a 4 as a surfer.
Okay, how about a skateboarder?
Whew, it's been quite a few years. Let's call it a 3. I think I've lost all skateboarding talents. I kind of gave that up over a decade ago.
All right, here's something you're more familiar with now. How would you rate yourself as a businessman?
That's a tough question. What's the measure of success here? What's the rating scale for businessmen?
I think it's production of something. Whether you're monetizing or not is one thing. It's just, I think, getting everything done and being a taskmaster.
Well, I'd say I guess I'm pretty thorough and have an extremely hard work ethic. So it's probably high up there. But something always has to give. So I don't think I've learned how to balance the life and business side as well as I could. So I don't know if that's related into the businessman or not, but let's call it an 8, I guess.
Okay, and then what number would you rate yourself at monetizing your business?
For going directly off of this most recent film project, a lot of it came out of my personal pocket, but it is slowly trickling in and coming back, and there's a lot of interest. So I guess I'd give myself an 8 as a businessman too, because I have a career and I own a home and things are going well enough.
Okay, and then let's go with rock climber. What do you rate yourself there?
Oof, I'd be in the same as surfing. 4.
Just a 4? I would think that you're rating yourself low, but I would assume that would happen from you being the elite level athlete that you are with no ego, really.
Well, yeah, thanks. There's a lot of incredible rock climbers out there, and I enjoy it thoroughly and try to climb as much as possible. Same with surfing and mountain biking and whatever else I do. But if that rating scale is the elite level is a 10, then I'm pretty far off of all of those.
Gotcha. And I should have probably phrased all those with some kind of percentage, but you know what? I was just kind of spitballing some stuff. But what other things are you good at? I think you probably play guitar, kendama. What other things does Chris Benchetler do that he excels at?
I am an artist. I've been painting more and more, and people seem to dig it. So I guess that would be considered a success.
I consider that in skiing. Everybody knows that talent.
Gotcha. Yeah, that, biking. I play guitar too. I'm quite bad at guitar, comparing myself to, once again, very talented guitar players. I'd give myself like a 1 or a 2 in the guitar scale.
Okay. So based on everything I know about you and how good you are at things, although you're putting yourself at 4s, we have to go with whatever you put yourself at, so we'll leave it at that. I highly value your opinion and want to know why I lost you as a listener.
It's nothing personal at all. I guess I should have done my homework and planned for this conversation a little better.
I told you we were going to talk about it.
I just thought maybe as friends. No, I honestly, okay, let's put it this way. I don't have a ton of time to read or educate myself and just get that mental stimulus that everybody needs. So I like to listen to things that I'm really learning something. And I'd say your podcast is very surface level. Like if someone's diving deep into their personal life or their beliefs or anything, I think you jump to the next subject too quickly. This skier kid I had no idea about, Slopey. And then Spriggs as well. Both of those were so interesting and things I didn't know, but you didn't dive deep enough for me.
Fair enough. I try to tell everybody's story in an hour.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the deep podcasts that you'll find out there are a lot longer.
Totally. Someone I listen to a lot that Kimmy hates is Joe Rogan, are always like 3 hours long. I only do that on like the philosophers or people that are super interesting, but I don't have enough time in the day for podcasts, so I kind of went to ones that were teaching me more.
All right. Well, I just figured I would ask you and put you on the spot and really put me on the spot as well. It wasn't as bad as I thought by any means. That's enough about me. At this point, we're going to step back to a totally re-edited conversation that you and I had in 2016 for a different show, and we can share your backstory that way so we don't have to get into it again. So now we're going to take it back to 2016. Your mom and dad were into the outdoors when you were a kid.
They were, yeah. They met up here in Mammoth in the 70s. My father was super into skiing. That's why he came up here.
Okay.
And I can't quite remember why my mom initially came here, probably for the skiing. And she was living with her cousin and 4 other women in a 1-bedroom A-frame. And then she met my dad and kind of moved herself in without asking. I think they had 2 like little A-frames in the quote unquote ghetto. That's what Mammoth calls it for some reason. And one of his tenants burnt the house down. So my mom's dad came up and helped him rebuild it. And he became a contractor. And then they moved to Bishop and got super into horses. And so they rode like cutting horses for a while and competed doing that until they had children.
I don't even know what cutting horses are.
I don't entirely either, but they round up the cattle. I think you have a rope, and I don't know if you rope the cattle or you just use the horses to like get all the cattle into one area of the arena. And I don't know how entirely they got into it or what sparked that, but I think my mom used to ride horses as a kid, so she might have introduced my dad to it.
You grew up 40 minutes from Mammoth, and you'd go up there every weekend and whenever there was POW days?
Yeah, we were definitely the weekend warrior program. And yeah, as I got older, I got into racing, and my dad kind of made a lot of sacrifices to allow me to do that, because at that time there wasn't really anyone outside of Mammoth that was on the race team, and we didn't have a ton of money. Race teams are rather expensive, so yeah. I kind of had a lot of hand-me-down skis and clothes from my cousin who lived up here and was on the race team, and then my dad was a volunteer host, not quite ski patrol. They just kind of help people who are lost find their way on the mountain. So he would do that so he could get a pass, and he would bring me up on the weekends for me to ski, because those were the days that Dave McCoy only cost kids $3 for a lift ticket, so that was pretty cool.
Nice.
Yeah, so come up on the weekends, then I finally was able to join the race team and started doing that.
How were you as a racer?
I never thought I was too impressive. I mean, I didn't win any races that I can remember, but I think I was all right. I made Junior Olympics once or twice. I forget what your results had to be, but you had to do decent to make the Junior Olympic team.
I would hope you had to do decent to make the Junior Olympic team.
Yeah, but I never won anything. I think I was a little bit more interested in riding the mountain, and the park was definitely blowing up at that time, so it was very hard to stay focused on wearing a downhill suit and racing when my brother and all of my snowboarder friends were having the time of their lives in the park.
When did you turn in the Lycra?
When did I turn in the Lycra? How old was I? I think 14, maybe 15.
Wow, so you raced for a while.
Well, kind of. I started late. My dad would bring me up on the weekends, and then we used to have a thing called the pay course. It was like a dual GS, and I think you paid $1 or $2 to race your friend.
NASTAR.
Yeah, I did one of those, and apparently one of the coaches saw me racing and then approached my dad and said, hey, you should sign him up for the race team. And I only did 2 years of J4 and 1 year of J3, so I raced for 3 years. I turned in the Lycra kind of when I realized that I had to choose one or the other, essentially. It was either train all the time and get really into racing and stop ditching practice for the park, or ditch completely. So I was able to convince my parents to let me step away.
It's kind of either be fast or have fun?
I guess so. Yeah. It was hard to go and train gates when it was like a powder day or any other day where you'd rather be riding the mountain.
The park's blowing up at that point. They're allowing skiers in the park, which I'm sure is a big deal for you because you grew up skiing with snowboarders. And at one point, were they allowed in the park and you weren't, or were you past that?
I was just young enough that I didn't really ever have to deal with that, fortunately. And I think Mammoth was actually on the cutting edge of that, too. They allowed skiers pretty early on. And though my brother was a snowboarder and his best friend was John Jackson at the time, so I followed them a lot. But also Rory Silva lived here, and I used to be quite good friends with Rory. Well, I would still consider myself good friends with Rory. I just don't see him much. But he was on the cutting edge for skiing. He was like the first person I saw ski backwards or anything. And then around that same time is when Pep and Tanner and all those guys moved to Mammoth because the park was pretty phenomenal. So everyone made their way out here. It was just good timing for me, basically, age-wise.
Rory has come up in every interview that I've done so far, except for Wayne Wong. He didn't know of Rory. Everybody I've talked to has a great Rory story, and I wonder if you have a great Rory story.
There's many great Rory stories.
I want the best.
The best? Holy cow, this is a lot of pressure. I can't think of a specific story. I can think of a simple one. He has a very bad diet for being a diabetic. He used to stay the night when we still lived in Bishop. He used to come down and skateboard with us and stay the night. And my mom's quite an impressive cook. And I remember Rory used to ask for just a cheese quesadilla instead of whatever we were having for dinner. And then when my mom would wash the sheets, she would find like Cheeto and chip bags in the bed and stuff. So I don't think his diet or lifestyle health-wise was quite the best for his predicament. But yeah, he has a heart of gold. He's a good kid.
his health choices compared to yours, who you might be one of the healthier people I know. You do live a super healthy lifestyle and are really active.
I am incredibly active, and yes, I kind of look at my body. I mean, I've been hurt enough that I understand too. I probably wasn't the healthiest early on in my life. I was a bit of a picky eater, but once I broke enough bones and kind of realized what it takes to come back from an injury, that what you fuel your body with is the most important thing. And kind of look at it like your snowmobile. You're never going to put cheap gas in your snowmobile because you want it to run optimum, or anything and for that matter. Yeah, you just try to put the best fuel possible in your body so you can last out there all day and do everything that you want to do. And in my case, I like to do things from sun up to sundown, so it's nice to have the energy to do that.
When you use that great fuel, have you found that it reduces your injuries, or it just gives you more energy and makes you feel better?
I'd say it gives you more energy and makes you feel better, but I mean, at the same time, I've been pretty fortunate with injuries. I still get hurt, but I think those type of injuries come from pushing it, you know? You have to be rational at times, and you can't just always send it. You have to take conditions into account and so on and so forth, and just be a bit calculated. And not everyone that is a professional athlete has that filter. They just kind of go 100% all the time. And I think that is more contributing to injuries than what you're eating. But I definitely think eating healthy and living healthy helps tremendously with recovery and just everything in life, really.
Are you gluten-free?
Not entirely. I kind of think life needs moderation. I avoid gluten, but I avoid a lot of things for a lot of reasons. I don't have any issue with gluten on a health level. I just don't think my body agrees with it all that much. I don't get a ton of energy or feel that great when I eat it. But like I said, life needs moderation. So if I'm traveling in Italy and all you can eat is pizza and pasta, I'm definitely going to eat pizza and pasta. So I think you can't be too hung up on diets and those type of things, or you're just going to make yourself miserable. And probably the most important factor in being happy and healthy is mental health. So if you're going to be stressed out all the time on what you're eating and can't have this, can't have that, you're probably going to be more unhealthy than if you were just to eat it in the situations where you have to and then try and be good when you can be good.
Your career, and we stopped at about 14. You had moved from racing to the park. I know at that time in your life, your family was super tight and your dad got sick. And I know that had to play a huge role in shaping who you are today. And I'm sure it still impacts a lot of the decisions you make. But going through a huge loss like that, diagnosed at 14 and might have passed a couple years later, how was that as an impressionable young kid? How did that affect you?
Oh, man. It affected me in a lot of ways. I don't know how in depth you'd like me to get, but I'd say first and foremost, being at 14 and just understanding the severity of cancer and the potential of actually losing my dad. Because when he was there, he was obviously insanely sick, but I just don't think at an impressionable teenager, you can't quite fathom what that really means in the big picture. So my brother and my dad were butting heads at that point because he wanted to be a snowboarder, but he's incredibly intelligent. So he moved up to Mammoth. They had a lot of arguments, but he started doing this thing called charter school where you don't have to actually be in school. You get to go once a week. But anyways, so he convinced my parents to let him do that. He moved up to Mammoth and he was living with Matt Hammer and just snowboarding every day. So I was obviously very jealous of that, having to go to school every day. And then on top of that, my dad was getting sicker and sicker pretty quick. So he wasn't able to drive after a while. So I started having to drive illegally to drive him to work every day. And then he has a crazy story. He was from Hungary. He never taught us Hungarian because they escaped during the revolution. So that's a whole nother story. But anyways, he would be in crazy pain and scared and sick and start talking to me in Hungarian. And there was just a lot to deal with that I didn't quite know how. And then my mother and him would fight quite a bit verbally because he was obviously scared of dying and scared that she wasn't going to be able to take care of us financially because he was kind of the main money maker for the house. So there was just a lot to deal with. I had to grow up very quick. I was a mediator between my parents. I'd have to drive him to the hospital in the middle of the night. I'd have to take him to work. I'd watch him sleep in the back of the car with his eyes open, just on a ton of morphine and Oxycontin, basically, to try and deal with his pain levels. And I would be like scared to wake him up every day. So I just, yeah, I dealt with a lot. I could go pretty deep. That was 2 years of that. And at the whole time, I didn't understand why my brother got to snowboard every day and miss all of that. But now I'm pretty grateful that I got to spend so much time with my dad, obviously, since he's no longer here. Yeah, it was a wild experience.
Yeah, I mean, that makes you the man of the house at a young age.
I guess so. Yeah, it was an odd thing to deal with for sure. But at the same time, he was very supportive of my skiing and would still allow me to miss school for certain competitions. Because at that point, I think I got sponsored by K2. I was probably 15. And so he was still around and still sick. And I did a couple US Opens while he was still around, but he was never able to make it out to him. Just my mom would come out. And so he was still obviously letting me chase my dream. I just had a lot more responsibility than most 14, 15-year-olds.
Now it is time for me to take a quick sponsor break. And my first sponsor is Evo. And they are a place I started shopping at way before they started supporting my podcast. Why? Because Evo does it all. Online, they have the best deals on the interwebs, and they offer free shipping on orders over $50, a low price guarantee, and the no-hassle return policy makes it easy to send things back if you have to. That's important to me. They also have stores in Seattle, Portland, Denver, Whistler, and I've been reading a whole lot about a Salt Lake City location in the works. In store, you are going to find all the brands, all the products, art, and a lot of passionate people who want to help you get dialed in for your next adventure. And for listening to the show, I've got a new deal from Evo for you on all Evo branded products, and everything they make is just as good or better than the big brand stuff. To get the deal, head on over to evo.com, shop the branded products. When you check out, enter the code POWEL20, that's all one word, and you'll save 20% on your Evo stuff. My next sponsor is Stanley, another iconic Seattle brand that has been ahead of the curve since 1913. While we all know Stanley for creating those iconic green bottles that kept your grandpa's coffee hot all day long, they still do that, and a whole lot more these days. They still are all about adventure, and they still are all about keeping your beverages hotter or colder than any other product ever created. I mean, I've been given just about every water bottle you can possibly imagine, and nothing comes close to a Stanley. Aside from being the leader in hot and cold, Stanley has always been the right choice when it comes to the planet. If you're still using single-use plastics for your beverages, it's time to make a change for the environment, and I'm going to make it easier than ever to do. Head on over to stanley-pmi.com, buy some stuff. I highly recommend a water bottle and a set of pint glasses, and when you check out, enter the code POWEL, the number 30, all one word, and you're done. You'll get 30% off your entire order, and when you buy something from Stanley, you are keeping the show going. Those are my sponsors. Now let's get back into the podcast. At 14, 15, you're worried about going skiing, you're worried about watching TV. The last thing you need to deal with is what you had to deal with. And at that same time, it's like you're handling the issues at hand at home. You're taking your dad to the hospital, you're doing a bunch of things. You know, there are times where you just go in your room, you just put your hands over your face and you just don't know what to do with yourself as you're so upset? Or do you just grab life by the horns and say, we're going to make the best out of this?
I kind of made the best out of it. I'm someone that wears my emotions on my sleeve. I'm not too introverted, and I obviously cry and things, and I would express my feelings, but I wouldn't dwell on those things. I would just kind of deal with them as they came. And I didn't know it at the time, but now something I try to practice is being very present in my life and live life in the moment, because it's obviously short, but I think I was fortunate that I kind of always lived that way. So I would just deal with each day as it came and learn from it. And even if I didn't understand what I was learning at the time, it definitely, like you said, shaped me into who I am today. So I'm quite thankful for it now. And I think it gave me a totally different appreciation for skiing. And skiing was probably a bit of a release for me because I got to just get up here and be with my friends and focus on the task at hand and not really thinking about all the hard stuff at home.
So you mentioned at that point you're 15 and that's when you get connected with K2. I know Pep was a big influence in getting you on K2. How did that all go down?
Yeah, Pep was just blowing up at that point, or I should say majorly blowing up at that point. I think when I was 16 is probably when 1242 came out. he met me through Rory. I just skied with him once or twice, and then we had a US Open or some type of qualifier. It was in Tahoe, and I won my heat going into finals, and Goot was there, and Pep and Rory were riding for K2 at that point. And so Pep just kind of handed me over to Goot and said that Mike should sponsor me. It's from what I remember. I mean, that could be totally different in Mike's eyes, but it was essentially that. He had just been watching me ski in Mammoth, and we'd met, and I think I did decent at a competition, and it just escalated from there.
That's exactly what he had to say about it. You're on K2 for a couple years. You had a Parkasaurus shoot probably a year into your K2 time, and that was a big shoot for you. I think you got MVP from the shoot, but you also walked away with a terrible injury. And Mike said it was one of the worst ones he's ever seen on the snow, just your reaction to the injury and the pain that you were in. What happened at Parkasaurus?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I walked away from Parkasaurus.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No. That was awesome because Parkasaurus was at June Mountain, and at that time it had an insane park. And it felt like home. I was at home, essentially. I was 15 minutes away from home. So I felt very comfortable, and I knew the jumps well. So I was guinea pigging a lot of the jumps. And the main feature there was this big 100 and some odd foot jump with a hip built into it, too. And no one had hit the jump yet. I guineaed it and got a couple tricks on it, and then kind of the photographers, when that happens, when they see something materializing like that, they kind of make their way over to the feature. So that started to happen, and then everyone was like, oh yeah, let's wait till sunset for better light. I didn't have any issue with that, and so being a naive 17-year-old, I didn't re-speed check or anything. I just kept going with the session an hour later, but the entire in-run had been shaded at that point.
Yep.
And I decided I was going to hit the jump switch, which I hadn't done yet. And so I went way too fast and ended up overshooting the jump by a solid 40 or 50 feet. And it was right against tree line. So there was kind of like an ice curb from the Snowcat with just some chunder balls over on the right. And I drifted over to those and hit one with my femur, and I ended up cracking my femur and then partially tearing my ACL, and I think that was it. Yeah, that was it. And then, I kind of blacked out and don't entirely remember the impact or anything, but my knee, it was slightly bent, but I felt like if I tried to bend or straighten it, that it wanted to kind of explode.
Oh.
It felt like if I did anything, that everything inside was just kind of explode. So that was unfortunate, and they put me on a backboard. Then I had to go down the mountain, June Mountain. I don't know if you've been there, but they have a very slow chairlift. So I had to ride by myself down like a 15-minute chair ride on the backboard before I could get pain meds. And then at that point, I was still in the money saving mentality portion of my life, and I didn't realize that insurance probably would have covered this, but I was like, I can't take an ambulance. That's way too expensive. So I had just started dating Kimmy a few months before that, so she was actually there, and she drove me to the ER in Mammoth, and then so on and so forth. So once I finally got morphine or whatever they gave me, it was mellowed out, but for the first hour plus, it was a pretty painful experience.
Sounds miserable.
Yep.
But that's part of the game, being a professional skier, and you recover from that. And I know there's a ton of hard work that goes into the recovery. And you know what? I don't want to hear about any hard work in recovery because we just want to talk about the skiing. At that point in your career, you've recovered from the injury and you're on K2 and it comes up to be a contract year for you. I'm in the role of team manager at that point, and it's kind of, hey, let's see what's out there, Chris, because at this point we have Seth Morrison, Andy Mayer, Pep Fuhas, Sean Pettit, and yourself all doing similar types of skiing. At that time, it was, we're going to have to make a tough decision at some point, and we thought we were going to have to let somebody go, but then you came back and you called me and you said, Atomic has given me an offer, and I asked you, I'm like, do you mind sharing the dollars? And you did share the dollars. I was, hey, I'm not going to insult you with an offer because what they're offering you is something that I'm not going to come close to, and it sounds like a great move for your career moving forward. And tell me about your experience with Atomic and what they've allowed you to be able to do, because they've really taken your career and helped you elevate it to another level completely.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, at that point, it was actually a couple years after I injured myself when I left, because I had just had one of my better years. I think I had closing segment with Poor Boys. I was in Idea.
That was like 2007, I think.
Yeah, and I had a Warren Miller segment, and then I had my first cover with Powder all that year. So I think that contributed to Atomic approaching me.
For sure.
And yeah, so that was like one of the better years I'd had since I had been back from my injury. And they didn't have an image that I necessarily agreed with or wanted to be a part of at that point in time. And K2 obviously did, and K2 felt like family. I had obviously built a relationship with you guys. So I think, yeah, it was a hard decision, but I just pitched the idea of me building a ski with Atomic because, like you said, Seth and Pep and Sean hadn't had a ski at that point, or I guess he had the Juvie, but he was about to have everything at his fingertips.
Yep.
So it made sense for me to kind of step away so I wasn't being compared, well, not even compared, but just standing side by side to all these greats. And Atomic didn't really have a backcountry team at that point. So I pitched the idea of creating my own ski, and then they bit the bait. And you guys, like you said, it wasn't an option for K2. So I kind of went that route, and I was fortunate enough. It was at the time when Rocker was just being presented. I think I had some prototypes from K2. I didn't even ever get to ski on the Hellbent, actually. So they were before the Hellbent, but I knew that Rocker was coming and that I wanted that in my skiing. So I was able to just kind of like take different aspects of things I knew I wanted and create a good ski. And then that did well, and Atomic was happy, and led into more opportunity and a bigger relationship down the road, I guess.
It's amazing. The image before you got to Atomic, from what I remember, I think it was Rex Thomas might have been the team manager, and they were selling triplets, I believe.
Exactly. And that's a bit different than my image for sure. And so Jordan Judd was the one who called me, and he had just come on board with Atomic. And luckily I was good friends with Pollard at that point, and he had worked with Pollard over at Line. So Eric kind of reassured me that Jordan had a clue and knew what he was doing. And I think he really helped Atomic come out of the trenches. And by virtue of that, I was able to have a lot of insight and have someone over here in the States that wasn't in Austria that understood what I wanted and what I wanted to do. So together we were able to help Atomic completely change their image and turn into an incredible company, because now I'd say they're kind of one of the top in the game with their athletes and their skis and image and everything.
I agree with you completely. They've done a total 180 from the triplets. And for people that don't know, at one point you could buy a pair of park skis from Atomic and they'd give you a third ski just in case one of your skis broke. And I never got that. It was like saying, hey, our skis might not be that durable, even though they were, because when you throw another ski in there, it's just like, well, are one of these going to break?
Yeah, it was an odd campaign, but I'm happy they stepped away and they've come out on top.
And it's a tribute to them listening to athletes. And one thing that's amazing with your pro model is not only you skiing on it, but you've got some other legendary skiers skiing on it.
I think because of the success of my ski, just by virtue of how well it skied, played a role to it, because that was the reason Sage and all these awesome skiers would ski on it. Dirty and those guys, is just that it performed a lot better than some of the other powder skis out there, and then definitely some of Atomic's other skis. So the timing was right. It was kind of like when I was back in the day on K2, I feel like every single one of us used to ski on Pep's pro model in the park. It was just a superior ski that we all wanted to be on. So that helped me tremendously, like you said. And then the marketing behind my ski was just a product of the time. A lot of people were skiing on it. There was a lot of good photos around it. There was a lot of people doing good things, like Dirty. One of the earlier years of my skis had an insane part, landing backwards pretty much the entire time. And I just had a lot of people doing great things on my skis. So the marketing kind of fell hand in hand with that.
The art on the skis is all done by you, and every rendition has looked great. They save a little graphic design money by having you do the art, but that helps you in the long run as well.
Yep.
Speaking of the marketing, one thing I've noticed over your career is you're really good at marketing yourself. You're really good at getting sponsors, and you're one of the hardest workers out there. And the amount of sponsors that Chris has, most athletes don't have that many in the ski industry, and that's really how you're able to not only make a living, but not have to think about your next meal. And I think you have 2 houses, and you're in a van conversion right now. So you have some money to play with being a professional skier.
Yeah, to an extent. I think I'm in a very fortunate situation where my wife is also a pretty badass athlete. So most athletes are kind of fending for themselves. These people like Pep or Sean, who have houses and cars and things too, but that's all coming out of their pocket. So I wouldn't say that I'm totally killing it by any means, but I'm comfortable and I'm a very hard worker, like you said. And I think the biggest thing that's been a success for me is just being forward thinking and thinking outside of the box. And with this van conversion, for instance, I've had a dream for a few years and I was just able to build a pitch deck around it and convince my sponsors and GoPro that I could create an awesome series for them by doing it. So I just have tried to find ways where I can kind of mix work with play. And a van is something I've always wanted in my life. I shouldn't say always, but I've wanted one for a few years now. So I've been brewing, like, how can I get a van and make it a work vehicle and create something around it? So that's where I came up with this new idea. So yeah, to answer your question, I would say I don't necessarily have money to play with, but I've just been smart with my investments, and I have a wife that's doing well in the industry as well. So we both use our minds and use our sponsors to kind of propel us further and try and set ourselves up.
So I read into that as I trick people into giving me the money to make the van so I can create content for them. So it's not really tricking people, but you're looking to your sponsors to help you in chasing your passion and in turn creating content for them that's going to help build their brands.
Yeah, which I wouldn't call tricking at all.
No tricking, I know.
We're both benefiting from it tremendously. And just the timing and how you think of these things, you know, van conversions are insanely trendy at the moment.
Yep.
I found a Finnish carpenter that was also into helping me out. So I'm saving money there. And this is going to be a series that will include him and based around him and create business opportunity for him. And then I'm going to be painting art on the van, or doing a mural for the van, I should say. I'm not actually painting it on the van. And so I've included a muralist that's a friend. And I think all of that stuff is just by being proactive and having friends in all these different sports and areas that you can kind of help each other out. That seems to be life in any job or anything. It's a lot of who you know and the opportunities you can create for yourself. And you don't get what you don't ask for. So if you just put yourself out there and ask and try and make things happen, a lot of times you'll surprise yourself.
Another thing to success goes back to your work ethic. You can have the greatest idea ever, but if you're lazy, you're never going to make it happen. And if you have an idea and you know your work ethic, you know you're going to put 110% into everything that you do, you're always going to be successful. And if you aren't, you know you put everything you had into it and there's no regrets.
Yeah, exactly.
You've been with almost every brand for at least, I think GoPro was the shortest at like 4 years. But I mean, there's 14 years, 9 years, 8 years. Loyalty's really paid off for you in the long run, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. I am very true to what I believe in and what the brands stand for. And I've tried to align myself with brands that kind of have a similar vision. And I think I've done pretty decently there.
So that's where we stopped in 2016. And now it's time to pick up where we left off. We left off at sponsors back in our last conversation. And who is supporting Chris Benchetler these days?
When we left off at sponsors, did we cover my current sponsors or no?
We had mentioned your sponsors and we talked who they were, but I just figure we'll list out your sponsors here because all of the ones that you've had, it seems like you've been on for a long time, between 4 and 15 years, it seemed like. So there's a lot of loyalty between you and the brands you're with, but what's your list?
Yes. Okay. Atomic, Skis, Dakine is my outerwear and accessories, and then Dragon's my eyewear, GoPro is my camera sponsor, and then Smartwool is my socks and underlayers. Cliff Bar, and then Mammoth is a huge supporter and always kind of has been, and Evo has always been pretty awesome. And I've invested in some companies, so we could call them sponsors as well, but June Shine, which is a hard kombucha company, Maria Coffee, and putting me on the spot here. I mean, I've always kind of been a supporter of the drink water movement. My buddy Brian and Austin started that. And then a few other smaller companies give me free things. And I am in the process of kind of working out a thing with Loose Towels because they're really interested in my artwork. They're just trying to make a difference with microplastics in the ocean and a few of those things. So we're still just in the early stages there. And then Protect Our Winners is not a sponsor per se, but someone I'm a supporter of. And the Young and Brave, which is like a cancer organization. They don't sponsor me either, but they're something I care about. And then I've invested in our friend's organic bakery in town, which is Deserted Organic Bake Shop. So I don't really know where you draw the line between sponsors or what.
You're the best. You're the best person I've had on this podcast. When you go through the sponsor list, I'm going to assume you do pretty well in terms of making money. I don't need to bring up numbers at all, but the details behind how athletes get money is something that I haven't really thought to ask about before. I mean, I've talked about agents and stuff. Do you have an agent?
I do not.
So all your contracts are done by yourself. How do those things go for you? Are they painful at times?
I'd say they're extremely painful at times. I'm very transparent and honest to a fault, probably, because clearly whoever the marketing manager or whoever that person in charge is, their salary is based off of getting you for as cheap as possible and spending as little marketing dollars as possible to make the company profitable. And that's how they in turn get their bonuses and stuff. So I'm very aware of how it works, but I tend to believe people probably more than I should in terms of budget cuts and this, that, and the other thing. But at the same time, I was never trying to get rich off skiing, and I still am not trying to get rich. I'm just trying to do what I love and make a career out of it forever. And like you said, I do well, and I have a beautiful life and own a home and a van and all kinds of cool things. So I'm very, very happy with where I'm at.
And like with your travel, do you have to spend your own money at first and then invoice the sponsors? Do they send you a lump sum for your travel budgets? How does that work? Is it different with every brand?
It's different. Yeah, it's kind of evolved and changed. I've started to push everything into a salary payment because I've started incurring more costs and don't want to have to get everything approved, because I hire Tyler Hamlet to film with me all season, and he's who I made this film with. And yeah, I pay for his travel and so on and so forth. So I try to just get as much money as I can up front and then spend the money throughout the season. And some seasons obviously cost a lot more than others, but just like this project I did, how I mentioned at the start of the podcast, I was willing to invest mine and Kimmy's personal money just because it's something I was extremely passionate about and cared about. And I see these opportunities as prolonging my career and giving back to me later in life. So I kind of just approach my work that way, wherever I'm going or who I'm working with or what movies I'm doing and so on and so forth.
We'll talk about this project a little bit later, but back to my sponsor questions. Is there anything that voids a contract you have based on injury or anything like that? If you get hurt, are you screwed?
Yeah, but it's such a weird thing now. I mean, like, so when I said I don't have an agent, I do have a lawyer that I have read over all my contracts. And there's certainly is injury clauses in all of my contracts. But at this point, it says if you can't work for 6 months or whatever, but now with social media and movies and everything, like, what defines work exactly? If I got hurt and couldn't do something for a year, I wouldn't just sit and twiddle my thumbs. So I don't think that injury clause is super valid. I could be wrong. I haven't been hurt for a super, super long period of time. My surgeries are generally in the shoulder department. I've broken a few collarbones and things, but I can get back to skis pretty quick, usually.
Okay. And competition athletes have incentives for podiums. Do you have them built in for anything like winning powder awards, or that doesn't happen?
No, I kind of took incentives out a long time ago. I've been with most of my companies, some for over 15 years now. So I think once you prove your work ethic and continue to produce, then that becomes less of a factor, I guess. Early on, when I was making a name for myself and building a relationship with those brands, it was more valid then because they want you to prove your worth. But at this point, I guess I've kind of proved that.
That totally makes sense. It's time for me to take my last sponsor break, and I'm going to start out with Skye Optic. For 25 years, Skye has been making the best sunglasses and goggles on the market. Yeah, there's a lot of good products out there, but no other lens on the market comes close to Skye's contrast and mood-enhancing Happy Lens. Don't believe me? Next time you're at the shop, try a bunch of goggles on, and then put on a pair of Skye's. You'll see the difference. It's a game changer. Another thing you can see is how much better Spy goggles look compared to the competition. I keep thinking the other brands will catch up in fit and finish, but they don't. For listening to the show, I'm going to make it easier than ever for you to rock a pair of Spy goggles, sunglasses, whatever. All you need to do is go to spyoptic.com, do your shopping, and when you check out, use the code POWEL20, that's all one word, and you'll get 20% off your order. My next sponsor is the Summit at Snoqualmie. They should be the choice for all Seattle skiers and snowboarders, as they are our local mountain. And here's why you should go there. There's no long road trips that waste a lot of your weekend getting to and from the mountain when you head to the summit. It's only 45 minutes away, and when you get there, you will never be turned around because the mountain has no parking for you. On top of that, the terrain is awesome. There are 4 mountains to choose from, tubing, and no big corporate pass programs that create huge lift lines. It's the smart choice for those that don't like wasting time. To find out more about getting a season pass or just a daily lift ticket, head on over to summitatsnoqualmie.com and they will have all that information for you. My final sponsor is the 10 Barrel Brewery out of Bend, Oregon. They have been brewing my favorite Northwest beer since 2006, and since they started brewing beer, they've been supporting the sports we love. If you aren't sure about what 10 Barrel's been doing in the action sports space, well, I'll tell you. This year, they produced a ski movie with Lucas Walks called Watch This. They produced a snowboard movie with Curtis Cizik called Hold My Beer. They have signature beers that donate to causes like Protect Our Winters, and they have the dates ready for this year's Hella Big Air events, which are a party on the snow and have some big prize money for the riders. The first event is at Copper on March 2nd. Next up, it's Bachelor March 28th, and everything closes out with a new stop at Mount Hood Meadows on April 18th. If all of that isn't cool enough, the people at 10 Barrel, they're all skiers, snowboarders, and bikers. So next time you head to the store, buy some 10 Barrel and support the brand that really makes a difference in the sports we love. Those are my sponsors. Now let's get back into the podcast. Your wife happens to be a pro snowboarder, Kimmy Fasani. She has plenty of sponsors as well, which helps pay for the most important chapter of your life, or one of them by far, the birth of your child. That's 2018, and I interviewed your wife before that when she was first pregnant. She was telling her sponsors, and she didn't seem quite sure what was going to happen. And what was the outcome of that? Was everyone super supportive?
Yeah, it's been pretty incredible and complicated at the same time. I mean, like you said, she's a professional snowboarder, and our careers are kind of, I don't want to say peaking by any means, because we're both going to keep doing what we're doing and keep evolving as athletes. But to answer your question, yes, they were super supportive. Donna at Burton was incredibly interested, and I think she gave her a multi-year deal and was really stoked that Kimmy wanted to keep snowboarding. And then when a woman runner came out that Nike wasn't supporting pregnant women in running, Burton answered publicly in like the New York Times and all of that they were going to retroactively add Kimmy's verbiage into every woman's contract moving forward, something along those lines. So that all being said, that kind of elevated Kimmy even more. Not that they weren't interested already, but it just made Burton interested in doing more with her and really utilizing her and telling that family story.
It's more relevant than ever. So it's nice to see in sports them stepping up and kind of setting the tone for everything.
Totally. Well, I think the bigger thing I learned as being a parent now is it very well may have been the sponsors, but it might have been the mothers too, because it is not easy to be a mother and an athlete to some degree, or at least in snowboarding and skiing, like you're pretty spontaneous, chasing storms around, and that typical way we approach the season doesn't really work with a child. So you kind of have to be more thought out and have help, which I mentioned at the start, and so on and so forth. So I think for a lot of women, it's probably not worth it at some level. And obviously Kimmy and I both want to be extremely present parents, and she's an incredible mother. So she doesn't want to miss out on Koa's life. And it was a huge decision bringing on help, like you don't want someone else raising your child. But yeah, I just think there's a lot of layers to a woman continuing her career. It's awesome to see companies support it, and it's awesome to see people like Kimmy just take it by the horns and go for it.
It seems like you guys take the baby everywhere.
We do. We're pretty lucky that both of our sponsors are understanding and supportive. and allow us to travel together. Like this summer, Burton let me and Koa come on a sailboat to the North Pole. We were like 400 miles south of the North Pole, but we were extremely isolated, and the captain and some of the guides thought we were psycho, bringing I think it was not even a year old yet. So we've done some pretty aggressive trips and made the most of it, but I think that was how we told each other that we were going to parent. We were going to try and continue living our lives, and we're not going to force him to do something, but we also selfishly loved the life we had, so we wanted to just bring him along for the ride, essentially.
Bringing him along, how many miles do you think Koa's flown so far?
I haven't really kept track. I remember Kimmy mentioning that she counted 7 countries in the first year of life, so he's definitely been around.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
With a lot of people, I would ask about risk and what that means as a parent. And sure, there's always avalanche danger, but in the way that you ski, it seems like it's all about finding creative, flowy lines. It's more fluid with like a relaxed style. Do you find yourself skiing much stuff that really scares you these days?
It's always been a fine balance with fear. I can't say that I ever skied a lot of exposure, like you said. I'd say I've had scarier moments rock climbing where that makes me be like, what the hell am I doing? Which is more like alpine climbing with loose rock and just more variables. But like you said, the biggest variable or danger skiing is pretty much avalanche. So there's always that. And I can't say that I've mellowed out in terms of terrain that I'm looking for, because I, as you stated, wasn't that gnarly to begin with. So I'm still trying to mitigate avalanche terrain, but I still ski at the same level and look at the same mountains.
Your skiing's always been about style and art for a long time. What we didn't talk about on the last podcast was Nimbus. That was a film project that went on for a long time. Eric Pollard, Pep Fujas, Andy Mayer, yourself. And I would guess that maybe Pep and Pollard, were they 2 of your ski heroes growing up?
They were. I would say Pep more so because he was living in Mammoth at the time. And before I really knew who Pollard was, Pep was kind of like him, and Rory Silva were the first 2 skiers that I really looked up to. And then outside of that, I grew up with all snowboarders. I kind of was raised in a snowboard household just because my brother owned Simple Pleasures and True Life and all of those older movies. And then his best friend was John Jackson. And then when he moved out, he lived with Matt Hammer. So those figures were more influential on my style probably. But then once 1242 came out and Pep had just come onto the scene, my mind was blown just like everybody else's. And he had already become a friend at that point and got me onto K2. And then I quickly met Pollard and saw some MSP movies and realized how sick his style was. And then I kind of grew up riding with Andy too. So I'd say it was a blend of friends and peers, but I definitely looked up to Pep the most out of the Nimbus crew at the start.
Okay. And before people were using the word disruption, that's when Nimbus came out, and they changed the movie game by giving away content for free on the internet. I think he gave away free DVDs too. I can't even remember. But how does the whole concept come together to, hey, we're going to create this and just give it away?
So Nimbus was theoretically created when they made Idea. And at that point, I didn't know Pollard as well, but he invited me on a trip to come ski with them for Idea because I skied pretty similar and I was friends with Pep. And so I came and did a trip. We all hit it off. So that summer after Idea came out, Pollard hit me up and asked me if I'd be willing to leave Poor Boys. And that same year that Idea came out, that was my best year with Poor Boys. And it was just in the time when you tried to get as many video segments as possible. I think I did a Warren Miller segment and Poor Boys and Matchstick.
You just said yes?
Yeah, like I was yes to everything. But then when Pollard asked me if I'd be willing to leave all of that to do what you're saying, to do webisodes theoretically, or just to give content away for free, I saw the vision too. And I understood what he wanted to accomplish. And at that point, I was just getting into surfing as he was already into it. And there was this series called Drive Through series with Donovan Frankenreiter. It was a TV show. I can't remember what station, maybe Fuel TV or something, but it was theoretically what we ended up doing at Nimbus. They would just travel around, a little group of surfers, and have fun. And, if the surf was flat, they would go screw around and do other stuff. And so I think that was a huge inspiration. And yeah, I was super into Pollard's creativity and hit it off with him. So I just decided to bail on everyone else and join the Nimbus squad. And I think he gave that same phone call to Andy and Pep because he wanted to just kind of have creative control of the content he was doing, since idea was a bit more collaborative between him and Iberg. So it was not a tough decision.
And you and Pollard are both talented artists. Nimbus had a ton of art that was iconic. And was that you? Was that him? Was it a collaboration? What was the driving force in the art of Nimbus?
Him. He was Nimbus 100%. I didn't realize it until more recently, but I didn't realize how massive of an influence Eric was on my life, just with his art and everything too, because I was kind of evolving and turning into my own person at the same time. And I had opportunities to do my own ski graphics and so on and so forth. And I wasn't consciously looking over at Eric being like, oh, he does this too. It was just, I knew how to draw. I was into it. I didn't consider myself an artist for the longest time. I just wanted to have control of my ski graphics and make something that spoke to me and was a big departure from what Atomic was currently doing. So Nimbus was all him, but my art definitely has evolved a lot over the years. And now looking back, I realize probably just seeing Eric operate, and I mean, even now you can call me a filmmaker, which was never something I wanted to do, but he clearly was doing that too, So I think just by being surrounded by that and seeing that you could take control of your career and produce everything on your own was a big inspiration for sure.
And it's a lot more work that way, but yeah, it's nice to be able to control everything that you want. And art collaborations are nothing new to you. And it seems like you found the perfect yin to your yang, I guess, with Skye Walker. And how and when do you guys connect for the first time?
Yeah, Skye is incredible. He has very similar style to mine, and he came up with UC Oksanen, who's a ex-pro snowboarder.
Yeah.
Very incredible snowboarder. He's a friend of mine. And UC had started Mizu water bottles and came up and wanted to go in the backcountry, and he was kind of supporting Skye with product or whatever for painting. And so he brought Skye with him to do a little photo shoot. And Kimmy and I took them all in the backcountry. And when Skye came to my house, he saw some of my artwork. And he was the one that was like, oh, your work is so awesome. And he showed me some of his. And we realized how similar it was. And he was just like, if you ever want to collab or do a bigger wall, I do large scale murals. I'd love to collaborate with you. And so I just put that in the back of my mind. And we went our separate ways. And then when I built my van, I wanted to paint the whole van, which then turned into a vinyl wrap. But anyways, I wanted to do a mural on the side of the van, which is larger than anything I had painted previously. So I hit him up and asked him if he wanted to collab on it. And then that started a extremely close friendship and a million collaborations later. I'm very, very fortunate with the ski career and the notoriety, I guess, and people's interest in my art. And I have a lot of opportunities with my companies and a lot of different weird canvases between goggles and socks and backpacks and everything. And so I have all this opportunity, and he's such a talented artist. And I guess you could classify him as a starving artist, and he's just trying to find art gigs as his main source of income. So since I have this opportunity to bring someone in that's a close friend of mine and we work extremely well together, it's just kind of a no-brainer. So I just keep bringing him in for collabs because I want to help him out.
That's awesome, man. I was at Evo today and I saw your big piece there. And does anybody ever tag your shit? Does that ever happen?
That one, I believe, has a couple little tags, but street art's pretty cool. There's like this level of respect for sure where it's someone's art piece, and even people tagging and doing that kind of stuff are expressing themselves as artists. So I think there's some level of respect there, but there's street artists and then there's also vandalism. There's a fine line, but I figured it would happen to me more often because it wasn't like I was living in the streets trying to express my artistic talents, like I was given an opportunity to paint on a big wall. It may be a little bit strange to some street artists that had to learn the ropes of running around at night and learn how to paint on walls, where I was able to do it in broad daylight. So I never knew what would happen, but they haven't got tagged to my knowledge other than a little bit of vandalism on that Evo wall, just in the corners.
Okay, and I'm not going to talk about Evo by any means, but let's say you're in a city or Skye's in a city and someone hires them to paint something that size on a wall. The art is incredible. It catches everyone's eye. He doesn't make good money doing that?
No, I mean, he does. He's very much becoming more and more well known, but what I was meaning by a starving artist is I had this already built platform through a ski career.
Okay.
So I had this immediate in to bring jobs, whereas he just did a mural tour. And so he's trying to educate people on street art and going to schools. And he does a lot of murals for foundations or for free. He makes money for sure. Like, that's his main job and that's his living. But that being said, just like a skier, I guess you have to have someone trying to find you walls to paint and do all that. So he's constantly on the grind, just trying to find people that want art. And how the more famous you are and the more following you have in social media and so on and so forth, the more likely you are to get a job from like an REI or someone. But because of my skiing, they're already familiar with my name and they're like, oh, Chris does art. Let's just hire that guy to do it.
Yeah, you've got a built-in audience.
Yeah.
Art's something that you've done on your pro model for some time. We talked about that in the old podcast. I can't remember if I left it in there, but we definitely talked about it. But the next big chapter in your life, I think, starts with one of your pro model skis in TGR. And the story I've heard is that the Dead reached out to TGR because they wanted to do a ski. Todd Jones happens to be in Mammoth, and he's talking to you, and you happen to be a Dead fan. Is that how it all comes together?
Yeah, it's a long story. I don't know how deep into this podcast we are, but basically, Todd was here with his son Kai. We were filming, and this guy Brian Francis, who had done some licensing deals for the Dead, was coming on board to run TGR's apparel company. And at that point, Brian Francis was trying to help the Dead find a ski because Warner Music Group had reached out to Armada and maybe Vocal and a few others, and no one was really biting the bait. So then they reached out to Brian because they knew he knew someone at TGR. And so Brian then asked Todd, and Todd couldn't really think of anyone either until he came to my house. And I think I was playing a Dead song on guitar, and then I have all of Kimmy's mom's vinyl records, and a lot of those are some Dead records. So we were just rapping out and jamming, and then he mentioned Brian Francis's name and introduced me to Brian, and then me and Brian just took it from there. So yeah, it was in a roundabout way. That was the introduction, and then I just took it and ran with it because I was passionate about the music.
Yeah, I mean, when that opportunity is kind of dangled in front of you, or that carrot, you just fucking grab it and run with it. You're going to make it happen when you know it's a possibility.
Yeah, it was a lot more in depth than that, for sure. I mean, I think I wowed the Warner group a bit just by how passionate I was. And they had done countless collaborations for decades. I think they even did a K2 ski in the 90s.
Yep.
But since Jerry had passed, they did one ski with Ski Logic, but it was a very, very small run and didn't really go anywhere. So they hadn't really done like a proper collaboration. And Burton had 5 years of snowboards that were very successful. So when the Dead reached out, and I talked to this woman, Eleni, at Warner Music, and we just kind of started chatting, and she understood how much I really cared about the music. And then the fact that I was an artist as well really was the icing on the cake, just because most people take the Steal Your Face or whatever iconic trademark they want and put it on a product, where I was actually trying to integrate their trademarks and logos into my artwork. And so that got them stoked. And then I pitched the idea of doing a backpack and a mitt with the kind to do like a multi-capsule collaboration. And then because Brian, who I mentioned, Brian Francis, was doing TGR's apparel, I designed some t-shirts for TGR. After all of that kind of launched and was successful, I pitched this whole movie concept because, like I said, I love their music, but I also had some ideas in mind and wanted to selfishly use Grateful Dead music for the project. So I just kind of really meditated on the idea and came up with this idea of playing and being inspired off the Grateful Dead's improvisational tapestry. Basically, how they approach their music was very similar to how we ski and snowboard and surf. So that was my pitch.
When did you start listening to the Dead? Like, when did you become a fan?
Well, my dad was always a classic rock guy. It was either that or reggae anytime we were in the car. And so they were always somewhat part of the playlist, but I guess I'd call myself more of like a Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix, Pink Floyd fan. And then my friend Conrad, years and years and years ago, was like the quintessential Deadhead. He had been to over 200 shows before Jerry had passed, and he kind of became part of our family. He started coming up for all the holidays, and he stays with us. And I just randomly met him at the gym probably 15 years ago, and I think I was just after recovering from my broken femur. So you knew me then. I think I was 17 years old or something. I can't remember the date I met Conrad, but it's been a long time. And so he pretty much, I don't want to say exclusively listened to the Dead, but he listens to them all the time, and just started opening my eyes and my mind a bit to how talented they were. And then he took me to my first Dead & Co. show like 6 years ago, maybe. And then that's when it really clicked. I was like, oh, I get it. This is incredible. Fast forward to when I'm talking to Warner Music Group, and I had really seen that improvisational jam of how they enter into time and space and just play off of each other and just feel the music. And if they feel like jamming for 15 minutes, they'll jam for 15 minutes. And so that concept kind of entered my mind then, I guess, when I saw them live.
Okay. And I'll throw in that for me, I had heard so much Dead at my Jewish summer camp growing up. I wasn't really super into them. And I remember once saying that I'd never see the Grateful Dead and I'd never do something to alter my mind. But then I had a girlfriend who bought us tickets to a Dead show, so I called a friend and had a really trippy night that night, and I had so much fun I went and saw him a week later at the Meadowlands. I don't know where I'm going with this. Actually, I do. Have you ever eaten one of those little white pieces of paper?
I have not taken acid, but I've taken a high dose of mushrooms for sure.
Does that influence your art? Can you see a difference?
Honestly, I took the mushrooms later in life for neurological purposes. I had done a lot of research on mushrooms and the benefit that they have to your brain. And I had studied this guy, Paul Stamets, who's a mycologist, and this other guy, Terrence McKenna, and they recommend taking a 5-gram dose.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's, I think, close to a quarter or something.
That's more than a cap and a stem.
Yeah, much more. It's definitely an elevator ride beyond the however many floors, but absolutely the visuals were insane. And I think that that amount of mushrooms probably is similar to acid or LSD, but I've steered clear of that because I too felt pretty creative and I wasn't necessarily a searcher. You know, I wasn't really looking to find out anything about myself that I didn't know. I was pretty open with myself, but after doing it a couple of years ago, I understood a lot more, and I think understand spirituality and all that a little bit better. But psychedelics are interesting when used for the right reasons.
Would you say that it changed you as a person?
I don't think so.
The way you look at things?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it shows you a different dimension and just helps you better understand how the world works. I still have a lot of the same feelings and beliefs and ideas. Yeah. The research I did really educated me a lot on how valuable mushrooms are to everything, to evolution, to our brains, to everything.
It sounds like you're doing it for much different reason than most people that are taking them.
100%. Yeah. It's a spiritual journey to definitely heal my brain. I'd had a lot of concussions and I went and saw a neurologist, and I had taken like a 7-hour test and failed essentially. So instead of going back and trying to figure out what Western medicine I was going to take, I started researching homeopathic remedies for brain trauma, and I stumbled across some mushroom info and dove deep into that. And so now I've taken lion's mane mushrooms every day, which are incredible for neurological support. That's just like a gourmet mushroom you can buy at the health food store. If you live in the Northwest, we can't buy it here in Mammoth. But anyways, mushrooms are pretty interesting.
Okay. The Dead have cultivated such an amazing image over the past 50 years or so. And you make a movie and a ski and a glove and a pack and I don't know what else you make with them. But what are the checks and balances that they have in place to make sure the art is on brand with them?
It is a process. I mean, I was so fortunate that they were really interested in this idea that I was creating. And so, yeah, it has an insane approval process. And basically it gets run through David Lemieux, who's the band's legacy manager and the official archivist of the Dead. And so he knows the music and knows the image probably better than anyone. And then it runs through the whole Warner team and Rhino Records, and everyone just has to give their stamp of approval. And they're very conscious of representing each band member fairly and not just letting it represent Jerry or Bob or one or the other. So I had to do a lot of iterations and different takes when we were doing the ski, which kind of showed me the light a little bit as to what I was getting myself into. And then once we dove into the film, it was a whole process where I was having to be on conference calls with Rhino and Universal, because Rhino owns the publishing and Universal owns the mastering. So it was just massive entities that I was, I guess, kind of underqualified to be dealing with.
But I think that's why you were able to do it. Because if a big company comes to the Dead and they say, hey, we want to use your music, image, and likeness for a movie project, it would cost millions of dollars to get the licensing, or it'd be a quick no. And is it because you're just a dude with a dream and you've done a ski with them that you can get this green light?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was, simply put, just my passion for their music and what I was trying to create. And I guess I had a good sales pitch. I don't really know. But yeah, I mean, even getting Bill Walton on board to narrate was the same story. You know, all of these people, their community and the Dead's following is probably the most loyal on the planet. And it was a huge weight on my shoulders to make sure we respected that legacy and spoke to all those people. So I was definitely aware. And like you said, I was just a fan of the music coming at this larger scale project.
With the movie project, when you get a green light to do it, are you involved in every aspect of making the movie? I mean, I know you like to be involved in the details of everything and you're a super hard worker. Is your fingerprint on everything?
It is, yeah. A little bit more than it should have been probably. But yeah, I mean, I guess I was theoretically the producer and the director and executive producer and whatever else. Like I had to sell all my sponsors on it, sell everyone on, I mean, even sell Tyler on it to make it. He has a massive role in this too.
He's your right-hand man?
Yeah, he was my right-hand man for sure. And then when it came to finances, Kimmy was a massive help. And as we got deeper and it got bigger and bigger and more uncontrollable for me to handle every little aspect, I brought on Justine Chiara, who's Rob's manager and agent, and she had just produced Momentum Generation, which is an epic surf documentary. And then Brian Francis was a massive and instrumental help because of his relationship with the Dead. And then we hit it off when Todd introduced us. So his relationship with me, and then TGR's role is just distribution because we needed a platform for it to live on. So I wanted to respect that intro Todd gave me and give the movie a home, essentially. So that's how it all came to be.
And when I think of the overall to-do list, before you even get on snow for something like this, and I'm assuming your storyboard or your concept is done, you still have to get the athletes, filmers, sponsors, planning shot lists, building light suits, surfboards, figuring out logistics, planning with mountains, figuring out how to light the mountain with color, getting permits, art. I'm sure you have an hour or more of fitness that you need to get in each day. I could probably keep going on, but with all that combined, then you have sponsor obligations, a wife, and a child. How do you even sleep?
I don't. It's a stressful life at times, but I'm glad you mentioned lighting and all of that too, because that was a key element.
That makes the movie.
Yeah, well, the Dead didn't even sign off on it at the point that I needed to shoot it, and that speaks to my passion for the project. At that point, Mark Pincus and Dave Lemieux hadn't given me the full green light that we could even use the music, because like you said, it has to get approved through Universal, which they're used to making hundreds of thousands of dollars. So they're like, what do you mean there's this ski movie that they want music for, you know? But I mean, the winter was coming to an end. And so I just had to commit and dive in. And in January in Japan, I had been reaching out to Sweetgrass because I had worked with them in the past. And they didn't express too much interest, but I kind of begged Mike Brown. He was in Japan, so I went and had ramen with him and just kind of told him my vision. And he accepted, which was a massive win for me because, for one, I didn't want to recreate or take away from what they created with Afterglow. I wanted it to be an ode and inspired by. I was trying to do a lot more moving lights and a more psychedelic landscape with a lot of different colors, and obviously the skeletons to represent the dead. And there were a lot of new elements, but it was pretty damn obvious that it wasn't just like I thought about making a mountain colorful with LED lights that clearly came from that shoot with Sweetgrass. So I wanted to make sure to respect what their vision they had created and try to include them. So I was very, very grateful that they came on board because I knew I wanted to do something at night and how I wanted it to look, but I only wanted one company to light up the mountain.
That's so nice of you. I mean, it's the same thing with TGR, just making sure they have the distribution. So you're taking care of the people that have taken care of you, and the thing's a visual masterpiece. I mean, there's no insane lines or crazy tricks. It's more flow and style, which has been the definition of your career. I didn't even think about the tricks in it the first time I watched it, and I've only watched it once, but I didn't notice them because there was so much shit going on that was just so pleasing to my eyes. With your direction to your crew, are you just like land your shit and make it look good?
No, I can't even remember what I was saying at night, but of course not. I mean, I handpick the crew because they're all friends and family, for lack of a better word. They represent music and they're fans of the dead, and they represent style, and each of them have individually inspired my career tenfold. So it was a pretty easy sell to most of the athletes, and I trust in them, and I was actually blown away with how passionate everyone was and how much effort everyone gave the project. Because like they have their careers and they have their other film projects and they have a lot of things going on. So for them to believe me when I hit them up in the fall and I'm like, hey, I have this idea, I want to do it, and for them to all say yes was pretty special. And so that weight was carried with me throughout the season and throughout the shooting. Obviously, I wasn't telling them to land, but I was hoping deep down that everyone was going to get shots, obviously.
You aligned yourself with people who have a similar work ethic as you have, so you knew there wasn't going to be any pushback on the effort, because I'm sure you pushed people a little bit to be out there a lot longer, because I don't know how much time you had for your night shoot. What are the hours on a shoot like that?
They were insane, and honestly, I'm glad I didn't leave this podcast without thanking Mammoth Mountain, because it would have never happened in a million years without them. And those hours you're speaking of, like the amount of cat hours and employees and just everything it took for me to organize and get everyone on the same page to be even able to ride all night long was insane. So, I mean, we had to deal with food and beverage and snowmobile drivers and moving all those generators and lights and everything. So if I didn't sell Mammoth on the idea and the concept, I have no idea where or how I would have pulled it off. It was 5 nights, 4 nights of riding, because one of those nights in the middle had 130 mile an hour winds. But my vision was to very much do it in the eye of a storm. And we kind of were stuck with our dates. Like we had a 10-day window, but it came at a time during the Grand Prix. So Mammoth was very understaffed because they had so many people focusing on a slopestyle contest. I can't remember if it was an Olympic qualifier or not, but anyways, it was a stressful and complicated time, and everybody, including the athletes and filmers and lighting and photographers, everyone put in so much time and energy, and the whole movie was meant to be collaborative because that's how the dead were, and so it very much was.
And to have it during a storm, in theory, that's super cool, but I can imagine between the winds and the temperature, it must have wreaked havoc on your shoot. Between lights going out, lights flickering, what are the other major challenges you have to that night shoot?
Yeah, I mean, the light suits were one. I unfortunately designed them, so they weren't the best pieces of equipment. I should have had my buddy Shane Treat, who designed the wetsuits. He's part of both shoots and was part of the original Sweetgrass shoot, but he's a much more intelligent mind when it comes to electrical stuff. Anyways, the suits were a huge one. There was freezing fog. There was every natural element you can think of other than avalanches. We had ski patrol out there, and they threw a bomb each night before we started just because there was a lot of liability being on a mountain, obviously. But I'd say just moving that much lighting equipment, and those lights aren't waterproof either.
Yeah.
So it's just like keeping everything dry, keeping everyone warm, keeping the stoke high. Yeah, it's kind of hurting my brain just thinking about how many complications there were. I haven't thought about it in a little bit just because I've been in full tour mode and thinking about just getting it out to the world. But yeah, we faced every problem you could have come up with, I imagine.
Well, I'm going to hurt your brain some more, I think, because when you get through the snowshoots, the movie's not done, but you can start finally working on like the editing, the coloring effects, the animation, music. I would assume you're sitting in the room with Cody Carter for long stretches of time, but then Cody has a baby in the middle of post-production. Does that pose another challenge?
Absolutely. And there was so many false deadlines in the end. Like, there's been so many layers just to the dead side too. Like, we had an opportunity for a vinyl box set to be released with it. So it was like, hurry up and get the art painted. And that person that was running point on that actually went on medical leave too. So that got put aside. And then, yeah, my original concept was to try and get this done by the fall. The Dead were doing a fall run. They were playing a bunch of shows. I wanted to have the piece done enough for them to see it, to show the band manager, and hopefully get them to live score it at a show was my dream.
That would be insane.
Yeah. And so that didn't happen quickly enough. And there was a lot of layers to that dream. They have 6-month lead times on their tour schedule and all that kind of stuff. But in the end, it all worked out as it was supposed to. I mean, like our New York premiere, Mickey Hart, who's the drummer, showed up and he loved it. And we went backstage with him the next day at the Nassau Coliseum show. And there's a good chance my dream will come to fruition in January. But I'm not holding my breath, but there is some interest. So I'm hoping it happens.
Well, that would be incredible. I hear one of the biggest challenges was getting the night surfing parts, which in my opinion was one of the most important parts of the movie. I heard you were denied to shoot at both Kelly Slater and the Waco wave pools?
Yeah, so Kelly's pool was 100% on board, which was amazing. I drove down to San Diego and met with them, with Rob, and they were extremely stoked on the concept and idea. I got to surf the wave, which was like beyond a dream come true.
Bucket list.
Yeah, major bucket list. And I flew out the lighting guys. We walked the perimeter. We had a complete game plan, had a lighting rental package, had a plan to shoot in July to get it done in time for what I said before, to have the movie done before Cody had his baby and to show the Dead and blah, blah, blah. And then the president at the time of KS Wave Co. was then let go. So we started back at square one, and WSL owns the pool. So then it got taken to WSL, and then it went up the ranks with WSL, and then they wanted to own the whole project and be distribution because they're a film house as well. And I wasn't willing to give it to them. So we kind of got shut down. And then we went to Waco with the whole same pitch, very last minute though, still trying to get it done before Cody had a baby, and so we could edit and so everyone could live a normal life. And the current owner of the Waco wave pool was selling, which we didn't know at the time because it wasn't public knowledge then. And then his house had burnt down in a lightning storm, I believe. And then I believe someone had just died in the pool. So the marketing people at Waco were like, hell yeah, this is incredible. We would love to have Rob come surf the wave. He's never been out here, blah, blah, blah. We're in. This is amazing. And then just radio silence. Once again, the same way I operated with this whole shoot, I just committed. I was like, screw it. They're going to come through. Let's rent the lights. So we rented the whole lighting package in Austin. And then 24 hours before the shoot, they basically canceled on us.
What a nightmare.
I had to pay a 25% rental fee for all the lights. And then at that point, I was very defeated and deflated. And Rob was like, I have to go to Indonesia next week. Should we do it there? I think kind of jokingly. And I was like, yeah. So we hit up this guy, Ryder Thomas from Telos Islands, and he let us come to his lodge and shoot it there. But getting there with that lighting package was beyond difficult, and getting home was even more difficult. But yeah, we rented all the lighting equipment from this friend of Rob's, Todd Heater, who works at Paramount Pictures. And so we had this massive Hollywood lighting kit, and then we rented all the generators, and I'd called 100 times before getting on the flight just to confirm that you could actually fly with generators. And they told me as long as they were completely purged and safe to fly, yes. But then we get there, they wouldn't let the generators on. So I had to call Todd at 5 a.m. He came and got them, and I barely got on the flight. We had 30 bags of lighting equipment that all weighed close to 100 pounds.
What does that cost?
I did a ton of research beforehand, and there's a media rate. So it wasn't that crazy getting there. I think it was a couple grand. But then getting home was a whole different story. They tried to charge me 12 grand to come home. I was like, absolutely not. And I had all these printouts because I had done the same research for Jetstar. Luckily, Kimmy was smart enough. I was doing an online chat with this person from Jetstar, and they agreed to the same media rate that United has. And so Kimmy is like, you should print that online chat out, because they're never going to believe you for all the phone calls you had. Because people would promise me things over the phone, but it didn't matter, you know? And so I printed that out, and that ended up saving us. But we tried to load the plane. We didn't try. We did load the plane, and I refused to pay them at all. And so they took the bags off the plane, but still let us load, which is apparently illegal. So then we had to go out of customs in Singapore and deal with a whole shit show. All of us had to sleep on the floor in the Singapore airport. And then I had to leave Tyler and Shane behind to retrieve all the lighting equipment. And we ended up getting them to agree to paying that same fee as United. So that was a painful time. So backtrack, I mean, just freaking surfing at night and being in the Indian Ocean and being this giant lit up lure was terrifying for me. And Rob pretty much surfed by braille the entire time. It was mind blowing. Like I said earlier, I guess I'm a 4 in the surf department, but within that 4, I can usually drop in and go down the line, and I could barely catch a wave. It was so blinding and hard to see because the light doesn't reflect off of anything like it does in the snow. It just kind of absorbs into the water. So it was extremely dark, and you couldn't see the transition of the wave, and the suits were bright, and we had, submersible battery packs that Shane had built, and there was LEDs in the board, and there was about every crazy complication you could think of. It was nuts.
What a long, strange trip it's been by the time you get home and realize how fucked up everything was.
Yes.
So at this point, we've been going for a while. We could go for a while longer, but we're not going to. What we're going to do is jump into something called Inappropriate Questions. And with these, I find someone that you know, and usually it's a surprise, but I found Tyler Hamlet. You've worked with him a lot over the years, but in Fire on the Mountain, he's your right-hand man. He makes a lot of things happen, and he made 3 inappropriate questions happen. We recorded them at your house, so I hope you didn't hear him asking them, but you might have.
I actually didn't, so that's good.
I'm going to play question number 1.
Is Pep an organ donor? And how are you privy to that information?
I don't know if I want to sell out Pep's parents' address on the line here, but I was 16. He's born in 82, and I know that because his birthday is 11/22/82. Steen Road, Ashland, Oregon. He was my fake ID for a long time. So, yes, that's how I know that. He had some backup cards for me. We both had long hair in our photos. We looked pretty similar. It was pretty awesome. When I actually turned 21 in the bar here in Mammoth, the bartender was pretty both surprised and pissed off that I had been coming there since I was 16 years old.
I can imagine. And it's pretty cool to have your idol as a kid's ID as your fake ID.
It was pretty cool, for sure. His middle name was not easy to spell. I had it dialed. Pepperell.
We'll go with question number 2.
Okay, these next two questions, we got some unsolved mysteries from Japan. Why did Pep fly home with Ronback's shoes?
Oh my God. Thank goodness this isn't inappropriate for me. I'm safe because Kimmy was in my room and we've figured out the culprit. But massive night in Japan. We had my friend who is quite successful that lives here in Mammoth. He's an older gentleman, was in Tokyo on business and took the whole Nimbus crew heli skiing with him, which was epic. He let us film while he was just lapping. And so we all went out and had a huge celebration, which was our last night in Japan. And we were supposed to catch the flight next day. And Pep, who was rooming with Daniel Ronbeck, who, I apologize, Daniel, if you listen to this podcast, but you're getting sold out. Pep woke up not screaming, but very loud. All of us came running, and someone had shit in Pep's shoe, which was in the front entryway. And not only shit in it, but perfectly landed in it, like intentionally shit in it. And so it became a mystery to figure out who did it, because John Jackson was with us too, and he was one of the drunker ones of the evening. He poured his entire ramen bowl on Pollard's bed. Pollard slept next to the ramen stain, all curled up with the comforter. It was just a lot of people drank a little too much. And so we didn't figure out who it was, but Jeff Wright, who was our Nimbus filmer, was filming this whole mystery and interaction. And in the background, which Pollard then found later, you hear Daniel say, "Oh my God, this is the worst thing I've ever done." So he kind of admitted it. And so we found the culprit like months after the fact when Pollard was editing.
That's really funny and disgusting.
It's totally disgusting. I know lots of people that pee when they're wasted in weird places, but that was the first poop I've ever heard of.
Yeah, I mean, you don't really see a normal human that has a sane mind, even if they're wasted, shit in public that often, unless it's an emergency.
I guess so.
I'm going to go with our final inappropriate question.
Then the third one is, speaking of flying, what else made it in a certain person's ski bag on that trip?
Oh, man.
Is this one on you?
No, it's not, but I don't know if I have the conscience to sell these guys out.
Well, why don't you just tell us what was in the bag? You don't have to say who it was.
It was in Sean Pettit's bag, and they bought some extremely stinky dead fish and cut it open and then just threw it in his ski bag as he was leaving for the airport. And so I think Sean had to throw away all outerwear, anything that was in that bag. It was horrible, but yeah, I can't sell out who did it. That was like an oath we took.
To this day, Sean doesn't know?
Sean does not know.
Yeah, you don't need to spill the beans here. Well, Chris, I've been a huge fan of your career for a long time. It's cool to have known you as a kid who was coming up and the world was his oyster, and you have taken every opportunity. A lot of people half-ass opportunities and take them here and there, but you've always taken them and just pinned it and made sure everything worked out. And I think this movie, Project Fire on the Mountain, defines that more than anything. And I think that's what you're going to be remembered for, along with a 15, 20-year pro ski career. But this one is going to be the one that stands out through the test of time. And it's an amazing watch that everybody should see. And I thank you for your time, dude.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I hope I didn't offend you with my judgment of your podcast. I think you did a great job here tonight.
Thanks, Chris. You know what offends me is the people that email me that say, "I love your podcast, but you're a douchebag." Your comments, they weren't that bad at all.
Okay, sweet.
So that was time with Chris Benchetler, who may be the most professional industry dude that happens to be an athlete that I've ever had the pleasure to work with. I don't know how he does it, but Chris has created so much in his career, and at a time where some are slowing down, Chris seems to be ramping things up. He's humble, he's honest. I could go on and on about Chris. He's that good of a person. And if you haven't checked out his movie, Fire on the Mountain, head on over to TGR's YouTube channel and you can see it for free. You don't have to be a skier or a snowboarder to appreciate the beauty of what Chris put together. That's the podcast for this week. I want to thank you for listening, ask you to review me on whatever platform that you listen to me on, and support my amazing sponsors. They are Evo, Stanley, Skye, Optic, the 10 Barrel Brewery, and the Summit at Snoqualmie. Have a great week, everyone.